I've got to tell you something. I'm dying. Not from illness, just from time. The same thing that's killing you right now, killing everyone watching this, killing everyone who ever watched anything. We don't talk about it. We get very good at not talking about it. We fill the days up. We stay busy. We look away. But it's there. Always has been. Underneath everything. What if we didn't? What if there was a way out? People have asked that question for as long as there have been people. And some of them, they went looking. If you too have always been there, underneath everything, check out Pantheon, a brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. Somewhere around 2100 BC in the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, the story was written down on clay tablets. We almost lost it entirely. The tablets were buried, forgotten and excavated in the 19th century from the ruins of a library built by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who had spent decades collecting every significant text in the known world. The Epic of Gilgamesh was among them. Scholars pieced it together slowly, fragment by fragment. Some pieces are still missing. What survived is the oldest piece of literature in human history, older than Homer by more than 1,000 years, older than the Bible, older than anything we have. It begins with two men who loved each other, and one of them dying. Enkidu was Gilgamesh's closest companion. They had fought together, travelled together, been to the edges of the known world together. When Enkidu fell ill, the epic describes Gilgamesh as sitting beside him for 7 days and 7 nights, refusing to accept what was happening. The tablet says he wept bitterly, that he roared like a lion and paced like a lioness whose cubs had been taken. When Enkidu finally died, Gilgamesh covered his face like a bride. Death was something that happened to other people. The tablets describe him as part god, part man, the exact proportion debated by scholars ever since. The greatest warrior of his age. And then it happened to the person he loved most, and suddenly it was all he could see. His own death. The deaths of everyone around him. The fact that everything, without exception, ends. The tablet described what happened next. Gilgamesh left Uruk. He wandered. He let his hair grow matted and dressed himself in animal skins. He walked to the wilderness alone, the king of the greatest city in the world, reduced to nothing by grief. He was looking for a way out. The journey took him to the ends of the earth, through a mountain passage guarded by scorpion people, across the waters of death which no living man had ever crossed. On the other side lived a man named Utnapishtim, the only human being the gods had ever granted immortality. Gilgamesh found him and asked him directly, "How?" Utnapishtim simply tells him, "There is a plant at the bottom of the ocean. It will make you young again. It is called..." The tablet is damaged here. The exact name lost. Something that means the old man becomes young again. Gilgamesh tied stones to his feet and sank to the bottom of the ocean. He found the plant. It cut his hands as he pulled it free. He surfaced, held it up, and then began the long journey home. He stopped to rest beside a pool of cool water. While he slept, a snake came out of the ground, smelled the plant, and ate it. The snake shed its skin as it disappeared back into the earth and was renewed. Gilgamesh sat on the bank and wept. The tablets record his exact words. "For whom have I laboured? For whom has my heart's blood been spent? I've gained no benefit for myself. For whom? A man who crossed the waters of death, who sank to the bottom of the ocean with stones tied to his feet, who cut his hands pulling a plant from the seabed, and his first thought on losing it was of someone else. He went home. He had nothing. And Kidu was still gone. The world was exactly as he had left it. They pressed it into wet clay 4,000 years ago. They already knew. When ancient people imagined living forever, what exactly were they picturing? We imagine youth, health, vitality, the body held permanently at its best. That is a modern fantasy, and it would have made no sense to the people who first asked this question. The Greeks had a word for what awaited everyone after death: Hades. And Hades was quieter than hell, and in many ways worse. It was continuation without substance. The dead in Homer's Hades are shadows, bloodless, weightless, barely present. They retain the shape of who they were, but none of the feeling. They wander, they murmur, they remember their lives the way you remember a dream. The outline is there, but the warmth is gone. In the Odyssey, Odysseus travels to the underworld and finds Achilles there, the greatest warrior who ever lived, reduced to a shade. Odysseus tells him he should take comfort. Even in death he is honoured. Even here he is a king among the dead. Achilles tells him he would rather be the lowest slave on earth, working the fields for the poorest man alive, than rule over the dead. This is what the Greeks thought death was, and it's what they were measuring immortality against. So when they imagined it living forever, they were imagining something specific: to stay solid, stay warm, stay present in the world of the living rather than dissolve into the grey half-existence that awaited everyone else. Duration, warmth, just a continuation of being here rather than there. In the 4th century AD, a Chinese scholar named Gu Hong sat down and wrote what would become one of the most important documents in the history of human ambition, the Bao Puzi, the master who embraces simplicity. Gu Hong was a soldier, an alchemist, and a rigorous intellectual who believed immortality was achievable and set out to document exactly how. What he describes was specific. The immortal remained in the physical world, persisting within it, remaining in the body, in the mountains, in the material world for centuries. Gu Hong documented the dietary practices, the alchemical methods, the meditations. He argued with imaginary opponents in the text, anticipating every objection, making the case as a lawyer would make a case. Immortality required discipline, correct practice, and the right destiny. He believed the body could be transformed, that staying was possible, that the warmth and solidity of being alive could be preserved indefinitely if you understood how. He wrote it down in 343 AD. He died the same year. Eos was the goddess of the dawn. Every morning she rose from the bed of the ocean and crossed the sky to bring light to the world. And she fell in love with a Trojan prince named Tithonus. When she went to Zeus and asked him to make Tithonus immortal, Zeus agreed. The Homeric hymn to Aphrodite records what happened next. Eos forgot to ask for eternal youth. Tithonus lived, and aged, and kept aging. His hair went grey, then white. His limbs weakened. He shrank. He could no longer lift himself from where he sat. The hymn says that when loathsome old age pressed full upon him, and he could not move nor lift his limbs, Eos laid him in a room and closed the shining doors. There he babbles endlessly. No more has strength at all, such as once he had in his supple limbs. He's still there, immortal, alone, behind a closed door. The gift Eos asked for was exactly what she received. She loved him enough to petition the gods, and the result was a closed door and the sound of babbling from somewhere inside. In 1542, a Lutheran bishop named Paulus von Eitzen was attending church in Hamburg when he noticed an old man in the congregation. Tall, barefoot, standing apart from the others. Every time the name of Jesus was spoken, the man bowed his head, struck his chest, and wept. Von Heitzen sought him and found him after the service. The man told him his name was Ahasuerus. He had been a shoemaker in Jerusalem. On the road to crucifixion, he had taunted Jesus, told him to move faster, to stop resisting against his doorpost. Jesus had looked at him and said, "I will stand and rest, but you will go on until I return." That was 1500 years before the morning von Eitzen met him in Hamburg. Ahasuerus had been walking ever since, through the fall of Rome, through the plague of years, through the crusades and famines and the rise and fall of the kingdoms he had watched from the road. He could not stop. He could not die. He was simply still here when everything else was gone. The legend of Ahasuerus spread across Europe for centuries and was used in ways that have nothing to do with what the story is actually about, weaponized as prejudice, distorted beyond recognition. What the story is actually about is this. He got what Tithonus got. He stayed. He kept being here, and being here, it turned out, was its own kind of ruin. In 221 BC, a man named Yingzheng became the first emperor of a unified China. He gave himself a new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He built the Great Wall. He standardized the currency, the weights, the measurements, the written language of an entire civilization. He buried an army of 8,000 terracotta soldiers to guard him in the afterlife. He was the most powerful man alive, and he was terrified of death. The men who came to his court to sell him immortality were called Fangshi, alchemists, magicians, men who claimed knowledge of the elixir of eternal life. The emperor employed them obsessively. He sent expeditions across the world searching for the ingredients. He dispatched a fleet of ships carrying hundreds of young men and women to find a legendary 1,000-year-old magician named Anqi Sheng. They never came back. They knew what returning empty-handed meant. The elixirs his alchemists produced were based on cinnabar, a bright red mineral composed of mercury sulfide. When roasted, cinnabar produces liquid mercury, the only metal that flows at room temperature. When that mercury is recombined with sulfur and heated again, it becomes cinnabar once more. A blood-red stone becomes a flowing silver liquid, then becomes a blood-red stone again. To the Fangshi, this reversible transformation was proof that the boundary between the states of being could be crossed and recrossed. The Chinese character for cinnabar and the character for elixir are the same word. He drank it again and again. The mercury accumulated in his body slowly over the years, damaging his mind, his organs, his ability to think clearly. In 210 BC, on his 5th tour of eastern China, he fell ill at a palace in Hubei. He had just taken another dose and died that night, aged 49 years old. His tomb, which archaeologists have scanned but never opened, is reported by ancient sources to contain rivers of flowing mercury, the same substance that killed him, running forever through the palace built to hold him for eternity. He was the first emperor to die this way, but not the last. The practice continued for nearly 2,000 years. Emperor after emperor, dynasty after dynasty, drinking the same elixir, dying the same death. The last was the Yongzheng Emperor in 1735, 1,500 years of the most powerful people in the same world, reaching for the same thing and finding the same ending. They knew, by the end, what the elixirs contained. They drank them anyway. In 1357, a Parisian scribe named Nicolas Flamel purchased a book, a gilded book, very old and large, its cover made of brass, graven all over with strange letters. It cost him 2 florins. He spent the next 20 years trying to decode it. Flamel was a manuscript dealer by trade, a man whose entire life was built around the acquisition and interpretation of texts. The book defeated him. He travelled to Spain to find scholars who could help with the translation. On the way back, he met a man who identified it as a copy of the Book of Abraham the Jew, an ancient alchemical text of enormous reputed power. The Philosopher's Stone was the central obsession of European alchemy for centuries, a substance believed to be capable of transforming base metals into gold. More importantly, for our purposes, it was said to produce the elixir of life, a liquid that granted immortality to whoever drank it. In 1832, according to records that survive, Flamel's circumstances changed dramatically. He became wealthy, inexplicably wealthy. He and his wife Perenelle funded hospitals, churches and charitable houses across Paris. Streets in the city still bear their names today. Where the money came from was never satisfactorily explained. According to the legend that grew up around him, and it should be said clearly that much of what followed was legend, built and embellished after his death, Flamel had decoded the book. He had produced the Philosopher's Stone. He had found it. He died in 1418, or appeared to. His coffin, when later opened, was found to be empty. Which brings us to Newton. In 1936, Sotheby's auction house in London released a catalogue describing 329 lots of Isaac Newton's private manuscripts. Over a third were undeniably alchemical. Cambridge University had already refused to archive them in 1888. His own biographers had wondered how a man of his intelligence could have been taken in by what one would call the obvious production of a fool and a knave. Newton wrote more than 1,000,000 words on alchemy, over 1,000,000. His Principia Mathematica, the work that established the laws of gravity and motion, the foundation of modern physics, runs to around 53,000 words. The alchemy dwarfs it. Decades of private experiments, coded recipes, annotated manuscripts, correspondence with the leading scientific minds of his age about the Philosopher's Stone. He did it in secret. In 1676, he wrote to Henry Oldenburg, the secretary of the Royal Society, warning him that Robert Boyle, sometimes called the father of modern chemistry, had revealed too much about a substance Newton called the sophic mercury, an early ingredient in the process of creating the Philosopher's Stone. Newton told Oldenburg he wished to commend Boyle to high silence. Secrets of a radical sort, he said, were going to be loosed upon the world. Tremendous damage could occur. Newton believed that the Philosopher's Stone was real. He devoted more of his intellectual life to finding it than any other single pursuit. The man who described the force that holds the universe together spent 30 years in a private laboratory chasing the same thing Nicolas Flamel had reportedly found 3 centuries before him. He never found it, but he never stopped looking. Nobody knew where he came from. The first documented record of Count Saint Germain is a letter written by the English politician Horace Walpole on December the 9th, 1745, describing a man who had just been arrested in London on suspicion of being a spy. He noted dark hair, evident wealth, several jewels, and large remittances arriving from an unknown source. The man was, Walpole wrote, too great a musician not to have been famous if he had not been a gentleman. He was released when nothing could be proved against him. He travelled under a variety of names: Count Bellemare, Chevalier Schöning, Count Weldon, Prince Ragoxi. He spoke French, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and several others, all without accent. He played the violin and harpsichord at a level that drew a comparison to the finest professional musicians in Europe. He demonstrated knowledge of chemistry, history, medicine, and the natural sciences that left the most educated men of his age struggling to place him. He called himself Count of Saint Germain. By the 1750s he had arrived at the court of Louis XV, who gave him a suite of rooms at the Château de Chambord and employed him on diplomatic missions of considerable sensitivity. He became a presence at the highest levels of European society. Casanova met him in Paris in 1757 and wrote about him extensively. The most enjoyable dinner I had, Casanova wrote, was with the famous adventurer. He would say in an easy, assured manner that he was 300 years old, that he knew the secret of the universal medicine, that he possessed a mastery over nature. All this, he said, was a mere trifle to him. In 1760, at a gathering at the home of Madame de Pompadour, an elderly woman named the Countess of von Georgi approached the Count with a question. She had known a Count de Saint Germain in Venice, she said, 50 years earlier. The man she had known appeared to be about 45 years old. The man standing in front of her now appeared to be about 45 years old. She asked if it was his father she had known in Venice. "No, madame," he replied. "I myself was living in Venice at the end of the last century. I had the honour to pay you court then." That same year, Voltaire wrote to Frederick the Great of Prussia about the man who had been circulating through the courts of Europe for the better part of 2 decades. "He is a man," Voltaire wrote, "who never dies, and who knows everything." He was observed across nearly 4 decades of European court life. He never ate in public, he never appeared to age. Nobody ever established where the money came from, who his family were, or where he had been before London in 1745. He died, according to church records, on the 27th of February in 1784 in Eckernford, Germany, in the household of Prince Charles of Hesse-Kassel, who had become his patron and described him afterwards as one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived. We do not explain him. We can't. We simply note that he was there. So, how to live forever? That's what I titled this video. That's what the question every person we've looked at was trying to answer. Gilgamesh at the bottom of the ocean, the emperors drinking the mercury, Newton in his private laboratory, the Count who never aged sitting in a room in Eckernford. How? But perhaps the more honest question that nobody sought to ask is why? Because when you actually sit with it, when you stop chasing the how and just hold the idea still for a moment, it starts to collapse under its own weight. Time only means something because it runs out. A Tuesday matters because there is a finite number of them. The last time you see someone you love matters because it is the last time. The first warm day of spring matters because winter existed. Remove the ending and you don't get more life. You get something that looks like living from the outside, but has lost its pulse. And then there's a question of who, exactly, survives. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your beliefs have shifted. The people who shaped you have changed or gone. The world you understood has been replaced by one you're still learning. We are not fixed things moving through time. We are things that time moves through. Every decade, a different version of you emerges from the one before. Now stretch that across 500 years, 1,000. The person who began the journey and the person who continues it share almost nothing but a name. Immortality might not preserve you at all. It might just keep the body running while everything that made you yourself dissolves and reforms and dissolves again endlessly until the word you is a sound without a referent. And beneath all of that is something quieter and more devastating. An immortal watches everyone they love die as the permanent condition of their existence. Every person they allow themselves to care about is someone they will outlast. Every home they make is temporary. Every era they belong to ends. At some point, after enough loss, after enough centuries, the only rational response is to stop attaching, to stop caring, to move through the world the way Ahasuerus moved through it. The man condemned to walk forever, still present, still breathing, utterly alone. This is what every culture understood. They weren't warning us that immortality was dangerous to pursue. They were telling us something about what it is. It is everything that makes life bearable removed, one by one, over an infinite amount of time. We have spent all of human history asking how to live forever. Nobody thought to ask, what would be left if we did?